A mighty empire. A civilization that once soared to the peak of power, only to vanish without a trace. Millions once lived in Angkor, the beating heart of the Khmer Empire. But where did they go? What happened to the grand temples, the unstoppable armies, the brilliance of a civilization that ruled for centuries? Why did it all collapse, so suddenly, so mysteriously? Was it betrayal from within? A cataclysmic natural disaster? Or could there have been a darker force, an unknown power that erased the Khmer Empire from history? The first records of Angkor were discovered by an archaeologist from Portugal. Upon setting foot in this place, he was astounded by the grandeur of a city that seemed to surpass any architecture he had ever seen back home in Europe. Angkor was not just a capital, it was a marvel. The city was laid out in a perfect square, with 4 main gates leading inward and a special gate reserved solely for the royal palace. Each gate was intricately carved, appearing as if it had been sculpted from a single massive block of stone. As the center of Khmer civilization, the Angkor Empire thrived from the 9th to the 15th century, ruling over a vast territory that encompassed most of Thailand, Cambodia, southern Vietnam, and Laos. At its height, Angkor became a true megacity of its time, with a population reaching 1 million. An astonishing 0.1% of the world's population at that time. At the heart of it all stood Angkor Wat, the greatest religious monument ever constructed, 4 times the size of Vatican City. This temple was built from nearly 10 million sandstone blocks, each weighing up to 1.5 tons, quarried from the distant Kulin Mountains some 40 kilometers away and transported via massive canal systems. The sheer volume of material used in Angkor Wat surpasses even that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And when considering the entire city of Angkor, the total amount of stone exceeds that used in all the pyramids of Egypt combined. The grandeur of Angkor quickly captured the attention of archaeologists around the world. As a result, countless theories emerged about the origins of this mysterious city. Who built these monumental structures? A document written in Madrid in 1647 even claimed that it was the Roman Emperor Trajan who constructed it, despite there being no evidence he had ever set foot in this part of the world. However, the truth lies within the history of Southeast Asia. The true builders of Angkor were the Khmer people, one of the region's oldest civilizations. They were pioneers in the use of bronze, contributed to the foundation of numerical concepts, and developed an ancient writing system that laid the groundwork for the scripts still preserved in the region today. Under the rule of great kings, the Khmer Empire expanded relentlessly. They built extraordinary architectural wonders and established an immense irrigation system, transforming Angkor into a thriving center of power and prosperity. But then, something strange happened. The Khmer inscriptions carved into the stone steels of Angkor abruptly stop in the year 1327. As if from that moment on, the empire's history vanished into a shroud of mystery. What remains is found only in the Royal Chronicles of Siam, which recount a terrifying event in 1431. Angkor was sacked and destroyed. The once glorious city collapsed. Millions of inhabitants disappeared. Its towering temples, once defiant against time, were swallowed by the jungle, an eerie reminder of the impermanence of the greatest empire Southeast Asia had ever known. How could such a mighty empire vanish without a trace? For decades, scholars believed in the theory of a sudden catastrophe, perhaps a natural disaster or an invasion by foreign forces. Yet, the truth appears far more complex than anyone had imagined. From its very foundation, the Khmer Empire was deeply intertwined with Hinduism. The king was not only the head of state but also revered as the earthly incarnation of the god Shiva, holding both divine and royal authority. To reinforce this sacred status, each dynasty commissioned the construction of grand temples, with Angkor Wat as the crowning achievement. It was not merely a place of worship, but a symbol of absolute power. Under this divine system, everyone, from peasants to nobles, served the king as if obeying the will of the gods. They believed that as long as the royal family remained faithful to the divine, the empire would never fall. But that belief began to waver when King Jayavarman VII ascended the throne. He not only abandoned Hinduism but also initiated an unprecedented reform, transforming the entire empire into a Mahayana Buddhist state. Jayavarman commissioned the construction of the Bayon Temple, a sanctuary without enclosing walls, symbolizing openness toward the people. He also renounced the title of divine God King, instead calling himself the Lord who gazes down, a name that reflected a more humble, human-centered rule. But this transformation brought with it unforeseen consequences. Historians often describe it as a non-violent revolution, one that rippled through every level of Khmer society. In the centuries that followed, successive kings wavered between the two faiths. Each religious shift further eroded the sacred foundation of the empire. Whispers of a curse began to spread, of darkness slowly engulfing Angkor. Among the people, haunting tales emerged, cries and laments echoing from abandoned temples, as if the gods themselves were mourning a betrayal. Yet the wrath of the Hindu gods was not the only looming threat. From ancient times, the Khmer believed their dynasty was protected by the serpent deity Naga, a sacred being tied to water and prosperity. According to legend, the royal bloodline was born from a mystical union between an Indian prince and a serpent princess, the daughter of the dragon king who ruled the seas. It was this divine connection that allowed Khmer kings to maintain their sovereignty for centuries, on one condition: they must faithfully perform the sacred rituals honoring their guardian spirit. When the ancient covenant was forgotten, the serpent god Naga grew furious and cast a dreadful curse upon the land, plaguing it with relentless floods, droughts, and natural disasters. Yet the greatest threat to the Khmer royal family did not come solely from the wrath of the gods. It also rose from within, their own people. By the late 13th century, Theravada Buddhism entered the kingdom and quickly spread, carried by a powerful yet simple message: renounce material wealth, abolish social hierarchy. The monks led lives of wandering and alms-seeking, owning nothing, holding no power, a stark contrast to the lavish and hierarchical world of the Khmer nobility. Meanwhile, the peasants were growing increasingly exhausted, crushed under the weight of forced labor and heavy taxation to support the empire's grand monuments. Injustice became ever more visible, and the new religion emerged as an escape, a promise of an egalitarian society where there were no rulers and no ruled. As faith in the divine nature of kingship began to fade, the Khmer throne began to tremble. By the year 1295, just 70 years after the death of Jayavarman VII, the idea of the king as a living god collapsed entirely, as the royal family lost its grip on power. A wave of power struggles erupted, and local warlords no longer feared the crown. Angkor gradually descended into a chaotic political battleground. The weakening of the royal court also led to the loss of vital alliances. In the past, the Khmer Empire had maintained close ties with other Hindu kingdoms in Southeast Asia, particularly Java and Kampa. But as Angkor embraced Buddhism, those alliances began to fracture. Some monks from Kampa even warned that if the Khmer abandoned their devotion to the gods, the empire would no longer be under divine protection. And then, just as the curses foretold, within a few short decades, Angkor was caught in an unending spiral of war. Beginning in the 12th century, the empire launched a series of military campaigns to expand its borders and control vital trade routes. Yet this relentless ambition soon became a double-edged sword. Under the reign of Suryavarman II, the Khmer army pushed deep into the territories of Kampa and Dai Viet, determined to seize control of strategic seaports. At first, they achieved some victories. But in 1128, the Dai Viet forces launched a fierce counterattack, crushing the invaders and inflicting heavy losses. Undeterred, Suryavarman II pressed on, invading Kampa in 1145 and capturing its capital, Vijaya. However, just 5 years later, the people of Kampa rose in rebellion and reclaimed control of their homeland. These costly military campaigns not only drained the empire's manpower and resources, but also deepened divisions within the royal court, accelerating Angkor's gradual decline. Yet the greatest threat to the empire did not come from the east, but from the west. Ayutthaya, the Thai kingdom that was once merely a vassal state, had risen in strength and began to challenge Angkor's dominance. By the mid-14th century, conflict between the two powers had become inevitable. Vast territories of the empire gradually fell into the hands of the Thai forces. And in 1352, King Uthong launched a devastating blow, leading a massive army to lay siege to the Khmer capital. Despite its towering walls, Angkor had never been designed as a true fortress of defense. For centuries, Angkor's location in western Cambodia had shielded it from attacks by Dai Viet and Kampa. But now, with the threat emerging from the west, a direction once thought untouchable, Angkor was more vulnerable than ever. The smooth stone roads and vast fields built by Jayavarman VII, once symbols of the empire's prosperity, now served the enemy. They allowed Ayutthaya's troops to advance swiftly, turning the very heart of the Khmer Empire into a sea of fire in a matter of days. Angkor fell completely, and a puppet king installed by Ayutthaya was placed on the throne. Yet the people did not surrender so easily. They rose up again, and in the end, helped the royal family reclaim control of the capital. But peace lasted less than a century. In 1431, Ayutthaya returned, this time with the clear intent to erase Angkor forever. The siege lasted 7 grueling months. Khmer forces, cut off from supply lines and with canals blocked, grew weaker by the day. The city was engulfed in smoke and fire, the thunder of battle echoing through its walls. When the final ramparts collapsed, Thai forces poured in, plundering everything in their path. Precious statues were taken back to Ayutthaya as trophies, symbols of a campaign designed to wipe from history a once mighty empire that had rivaled the glory of Rome in the west. Although Ayutthaya never fully controlled Khmer territory, the blow it dealt forced the royal family to make an inevitable decision, to abandon their ancient capital. The king moved the court southward, to a location more defensible, but it could never recapture the brilliance of Angkor. This marked the end of the Khmer Empire's golden age, the beginning of an irreversible decline from which it would never recover. But something still remains unexplained. Despite heavy losses, this center of power once rose again with remarkable strength. Even monumental structures like Angkor Thom were built after periods of great turmoil. The relocation of the capital did not necessarily signify the total collapse of a cultural and religious heartland. To explain this mystery, many theories have emerged: natural disasters, epidemics, but no concrete evidence supports these claims. Archaeologists have also dismissed the idea that a single catastrophic event could have wiped out an entire empire. The only certainty is that Angkor's decline did not happen overnight. It was the result of many converging factors. Only in recent studies have researchers uncovered a deeper cause, one rooted in the very foundation that once nurtured and elevated the Khmer Empire to greatness: the changing forces of nature and the gradual collapse of its vast irrigation system. Unlike other ancient civilizations such as Egypt or Mesopotamia, which flourished beside great rivers, the Khmer were forced to construct a vast network of canals and reservoirs to secure water for agriculture. But as this system expanded to meet the demands of a growing population and rising food needs, it began to reveal fatal weaknesses. Forests were continually cleared to make way for rice fields, leading to a steady loss of vegetation that once held the soil in place, resulting in severe erosion. When heavy rains came, the loosened earth was swept into the waterways, clogging canals and disrupting the flow of water. Archaeologist Grosslier discovered thick layers of sediment covering the irrigation network, revealing just how dire the situation had become. As a result, the once prosperous fields, capable of producing 3 to 4 harvests a year, began to wither. With water becoming scarce, farmers could no longer sustain their crops, and rice yields plummeted. This not only jeopardized food security but also shook the very foundation of the Khmer economy, which depended heavily on rice for trade and taxation. Civil officials and local authorities gradually abandoned the city, leaving behind a weakened administrative system. A recent study revealed a significant population decline beginning in the 14th century, reflecting the gradual exodus of the ruling elite. But the tragic story of this empire did not end there. About 700 kilometers east of the great city, deep within the dense forests of what is now Vietnam's Phnom Baikeng National Park, a crucial mystery began to unravel. Scientists studied the growth rings of ancient cypress trees. By analyzing these rings, they were able to travel back in time, reconstructing the climate history of Southeast Asia during the height of Angkor's power. Wide rings indicated years of abundant rainfall, while narrow ones signaled periods of drought. Then, researchers uncovered a shocking truth. Around the year 1330, the region was struck by a devastating drought that lasted for 3 decades. Even more severe, another intense drought erupted between 1400 and 1420. For a civilization built upon water, these were the unmistakable signs of an unavoidable catastrophe. As the reservoirs dried up and crops failed, famine spread across the land. A city that once sustained hundreds of thousands was now struggling just to survive. It is likely that this growing food crisis led to the gradual abandonment of Angkor. Even more telling, the final inscription carved into stone at Angkor is dated to the year 1327, almost exactly when the first megadrought began. Yet despite the harsh climate conditions, evidence shows that the people of Angkor tried to adapt. As the elite and irrigation engineers abandoned the city, the remaining communities continued to modify the canal system, digging new channels to better store and manage water. At first, this plan seemed to work, and they believed they had solved the problem, just as they had done many times over the centuries. But now, nature struck a final, devastating blow to the already faltering civilization. When the drought finally ended, the rains returned, suddenly and with overwhelming force. Torrents of water rushed down from the hills, flooding the newly dug canals with volumes that could not be contained. Reservoirs filled rapidly, then burst apart under the pressure, unable to withstand the deluge. In a state of panic, the Khmer tried to drain the reservoirs, dug emergency escape channels, and even attempted to block the very canals they had built just years earlier. But it was all in vain. Floodwaters swept through the city, tearing away the fragile wooden homes in their path. Once again, the Khmer were forced to re-engineer their vast water system. They sealed off newly built canals and expanded spillways to release water from the reservoirs. But just as things seemed to stabilize, the drought returned, plunging them back into a brutal cycle: prolonged dryness, rushed adjustments, followed by floods that wiped out everything. This relentless pattern pushed Angkor's irrigation system to its breaking point, like an overloaded machine. When one part failed, others bore the strain, until the entire system collapsed. A striking testament to the desperation of the time is the bridge leading into the Angkor complex, a structure built hastily, lacking the intricate architectural details once characteristic of Khmer design. Upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that the bridge was constructed from repurposed stone blocks, originally part of nearby temples. This act reveals just how dire the situation had become. They were forced to dismantle even their most sacred monuments in order to rebuild critical infrastructure. But even the bridge could not endure. Its eastern end collapsed, while the river beneath slowly filled with silt and debris. This raises a profound question: were the people abandoning Angkor because the water system had failed, or did the system collapse because the people had already begun to leave? Perhaps these two forces became locked in a never-ending cycle. As Angkor lost its status as a central power, the resources needed to maintain its vast irrigation system began to dwindle. Canals were no longer dredged, reservoirs filled with silt, and the unforgiving power of nature ultimately destroyed the entire network. It wasn't just water. Disease also played a role in the collapse. As the city flooded, its water management system broke down, unleashing outbreaks of deadly illnesses like cholera and dysentery. Stagnant water became a breeding ground for mosquitoes, triggering waves of malaria. The population declined sharply, and those who remained may have come to believe the city was cursed. Gradually, Angkor no longer had the manpower to sustain itself, and its fate became inevitable: a crumbling ruin swallowed by the jungle. The temple roofs, once symbols of a mighty empire, became nothing more than playgrounds for monkeys. The green forest, like a silent invading army, reclaimed the streets and palaces once ruled by humankind. Even today, Angkor remains an important center of Buddhist pilgrimage and worship. More importantly, the Khmer people never vanished. They continue to live on the land of Cambodia, working the rice fields across what is now known as the Greater Angkor region, just as their ancestors did for centuries. And yet, the radiant glory of an empire that once ruled over Southeast Asia may never return.